In this part of railroad crossing safety for commercial motor vehicle drivers, we're going to cover why you should not rely on the train applying the emergency brakes at railroad crossings. You see, in railroad crossing safety videos, they always say something like it takes over a mile for a train to stop when the emergency brakes are activated. But would you be surprised if I told you that the emergency brakes aren't always activated at railroad crossings? In case you're wondering why, I'll paint you a little picture using trucks as an example. So, let's say you're driving a truck on the highway at 55 miles per hour, which is the speed they normally use for a comparison in railroad crossing safety videos. What do you think would happen if, while driving at 55 miles per hour, you were to pull the parking brake lever? Well, you would probably lose control of the truck. Something like that can pretty much happen if the emergency brakes are applied on a train. You're pretty much sacrificing total control of what happens to the cars behind you. Now, trains have similar-ish physics to trucks. If you were to multiply them by like 10,000, I guess. So, if trucks can jackknife, then it's a pretty safe bet that trains can as well. And, in fact, they can. Here are a few examples of jackknife derailments. A common cause of jackknife derailments is decelerating too quickly, which is pretty much a common cause of jackknifing in a truck as well. Due to the large amount of slack between each train coupler, the cars that are moving in the rear are going way faster than the ones in the front due to how quickly the train decelerated, and the cars that are in the rear simply push the slower moving cars off the track. Now, this isn't really often the case on passenger trains because passenger trains have type H couplers. These couplers are designed to minimize slack between cars, but freight trains have a lot of slack between the cars. Some passenger cars don't even have couplers. They're permanently coupled to each other with a metal bar between the two cars. These can't be coupled to regular train cars, and the only way to decouple them is to lift the entire train in the air and remove the bar that attaches them. A good example of this is the Acela Express. And you'll see that there is not a lot of slack between these two cars. This is the vestibule inside an Acela Express. And even though it's currently slowing down for the station, you'll see in this short clip of the vestibule that the cars don't get any closer to each other.
Stop and the door open. We ask that you choose step when leaving the train, and on behalf of the staff room, thanks for choosing Amtrak. Have a safe and pleasant evening. This is Philadelphia 33 Station, now arriving.
Here are some more examples of jackknife derailments. This is a Type E coupler, and it's very common on American freight cars. These couplers are designed to allow slack because this allows the locomotive to pick up each car one at a time, which reduces the amount of energy required to start the train from a standstill. Normally, when slowing down, the brakes are applied one by one to each car to prevent the train from decelerating too quickly. However, when the emergency brakes are activated, it instantly, or as quickly as possible, empties the air out of all of the train cars, which makes the brakes apply a lot faster. This could damage the cargo in the train, as well as damage the train itself. Applying the brakes too quickly on a train can also result in damaged wheels and dented rails. In this video, the rails were dented by a previous train that had applied the brakes very hard while going over the same section of track. The dent in the rails caused the wheels on several of these freight cars to derail. Now, flat wheels aren't always that dangerous. It depends on whether or not they get to a certain point. They're actually pretty common on passenger trains because of how hard the brakes are often applied on them. In fact, if you've ever rode an Amtrak or New Jersey Transit train, you've likely heard or felt a flat wheel on at least one of the cars you were riding. Here are some examples of what flat wheels sound like on a freight train when they're not at a dangerous point. By now you probably know that applying the brakes too hard on a train can result in a jackknife derailment, which is likely worse than just hitting the object that's on the railroad crossing. But there's another reason why this could be potentially dangerous, and that is if the train has a tank car on it that is carrying hazmat. Tank cars are train cars that carry liquids, some of it hazmat. If a tank car carrying hazmat derails, it can result in something like this. Fireballs, hazmat fires, dangerous content leaking into the environment, and even explosions. Now these explosions are no laughing matter. I once saw one in a documentary about train wrecks that blew a tank car into the sky and it landed over a mile away from the derailment. So these are not anything to be taken lightly. Now, fires and explosions aren't the only dangers involved with these kinds of derailments. Toxic fumes could leak into towns and force evacuations. Steps have been taken to prevent these types of fires from happening in the future. Normal tank cars these days are equipped with F-type couplers like the one you see in this picture. An F-type coupler has a top and bottom shield on it that prevent the train car that's attached in front of or behind it from going above the coupler and puncturing the inside of the tank with its coupler. And tank cars carrying hazmat are usually coupled in front of and behind an empty hopper or box car to help cushion it in the event of a derailment. On Norfolk Southern trains, hazmat cars usually have a carbon black hopper in front of and behind it. Now, that isn't to say that it's safer to hit the vehicle that's on the railroad crossing, as that can also result in a derailment. Really, the best thing you can do is just try to keep your vehicles off the tracks as much as possible, and try not to get stuck on a railroad crossing. That's the safest thing you can do. Trains actually have been derailed by something as small as a car if the conditions are correct. Like, for example, recently a train derailed because while hitting a car, the car was pushed into a power utility pole and knocked it down. So, under the right circumstances, the vehicle on the tracks can cause a derailment. So just stay off the railroad crossings whenever you can.
Well, that's all I have for this part. In the next part, we're going to discuss railroad crossing malfunctions like this one in Nazareth, Pennsylvania.
Shoo.